What's going on, everybody? It's the Tom Roland Podcast brought to you by Danco. We're doing How To Tuesdays boating. And one of the things that a lot of people ask is, how do you know if you're dragging anchor? You know, the wind's blowing. A lot of times you're pulling a lot of slack out of the anchor line, and you also look around, and if you're not really all that familiar with boating, you kind of feel like, you know, the tide's moving, the wind's blowing. Are you actually sitting still? Harley's got some good advice for us about how to do that. Harley, what do you tell people about how to know if you're dragging anchor?
What I like to do is when I set my anchor down on that spot, I'll press mark on the GPS. So then you let a lot of road out, let a lot of scope out, and say you're in a couple feet of water, 10 feet, whatever, and say you're hanging, you're hooked on the bottom at about 100 feet away from that initial anchor from the mark. So if you start dragging anchor, you'll start to see that distance increase between you and that mark that you set on the GPS. So say you're getting 110, 120, 130 feet away from that mark, then you know you're dragging. Because a lot of the times, many times, you may be out in open water. You don't have a good reference side to side. You can't really see land and reference too much. So I like pressing mark right when I put down the anchor, drift back, say you're 100 feet away from that mark. And if you're within about 5-10 feet between that 100 feet, then you're good. But if you start drifting 10 feet, 20 feet away from that 100-foot mark, then you're probably dragging.
And if you're dragging, best practice, you need to re-anchor, because what has happened probably, in my experience, is that the anchor it's not in a position that it's going to ever grab if it's dragging like that. So picking it up, it got fouled on the way down, something happened, and the anchor is not working properly. So you got to pick it all back up, anchor again, and that's frustrating.
But the Coast Guard recommends a scope ratio of 1 foot of depth to 5 foot of line to 1 foot of depth, 10 foot of line, just depending on conditions.
What about chain? Do they have a recommendation? Coast Guard have a recommendation on chain for just a recreational boater?
They don't specifically, but the more chain, the better, because what that chain is doing is laying on the sea surface. It's actually helping that anchor dig in, because you have the weight of the anchor and then you have all of that chain leading across the bottom. So the more chain, really, if you have more chain, you can kind of get by with less scope, which is the length of the anchor line.
Good tips. You can find more tips on How To Boating. You can go to that website, howtoboating.com, or Harley, what are your Instagram, TikTok, other handles?
It's all at How To Boating. There's no spaces in between the words. How To Boating.
Okay, that's Captain Harley Hunt, How To Boating. Go check him out. He's a great follow, and you can certainly learn a lot about boating, whether you're experienced or a beginner. All right, we'll be back next week with more tips. See ya.